All right, we're back. We are GAME 2015 in the winter 2019 semester at George Brown, and we're doing VR development. We are week 10, and we're talking about an intro to animation with Blender. So please kick up your Blender applications. I'm going to do that. We're going to get to this later on in a bit when we talk about this. So, okay, quick question. Difference between, we talked about this actually last year, if I'm not wrong. The difference between animation and locomotion is, what is it? What's locomotion and what's animation? Okay, animation is fixed. What else? What's locomotion, though? Let's continue with that thought.
It's a transformation.
Transformation.
From one point to another.
I like it. I like it. So it's a transformation that takes your object, let's say, from one point to another. Maybe it also rotates it. It can also scale the object. Those are transformations, right? And that's a locomotion. We kind of move things from one thing to the other. And we want to do this. The thing with locomotion, which is different than just movement, is, or translation, is it happens over time. Locomotion is movement over time, you know, some kind of motion over time, or translations over time. Animation is what, though? What's animation? So I've got locomotion is movement over time, or translation over time. But what's animation?
Changing
the mesh over time.
Okay, changing the mesh over time. It's kind of like that. But I always like to think of it like this. If the game object is a container for your mesh, right? Then when the game object moves, your mesh also moves along with it, right? But the mesh itself could have its own internal local motion, local animations, local movements, if you will, that happen over time as well. So independently of the locomotion. So I could have movement, and I can also have animation, but those two things don't have to be coupled. They can be completely decoupled, right? So they can be done separately. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how to do basic things in Blender, as well as in a later video, we're going to do how to bring some of this stuff into Unity, which is our main tool for game production. All right, so here's our cube. As a refresher for Blender, we have a couple things. One is our toolbar is on the left. We have something called the timeline that's on the bottom. I'm not sure if you've seen this before or if you've ignored it, maybe. There's also on the right, there is our inspector and our property bar on the right-hand side here. We also have in the middle our view, our 3D view, where you have our game object, if you will, just like normal, with three handles that can constrain movement across different axes. All right, so this is great. In order for me to move an object over time to create locomotion or capture some animation, I'm going to do it across different keyframes. So we're going to use the word keyframes, and it might be new for some of you. So what keyframes are we're going to capture location, rotation, and scale at different points in time, right? And then what's going to happen is, instead of doing all the animation by hand, in the past, what happened was every time we had a motion, if someone was drawing things in 2D, animators, like Disney animators, what they would do is they would poses in between the two keyframes, right? And those people are actually called in-betweeners. People that actually, it was a job someone had, right? And usually it's a job that's very repetitive, so they give it to another country. They outsourced it a lot of times to Japan. They outsourced it to China, India, those places where and from the West's perspective, lower labor rate, and so they did these in-betweens. And what happened was they were doing all the hard labor, the hard work that computers do today. And what computers do today is they do all the in-betweens, but they do them by using interpolation. So you have two positions and locations and scales, and we kind of want to move our model from one position to another, or one state to another state, and we want to do all the little animations in between, but we want to do it mathematically as opposed to drawing each individual, or rendering each individual state. And so we do all the in-betweens, in this case, automatically, as opposed to, mathematically, sorry, as opposed to manually. All right, so how does this work? So here on the bottom, we have our timeline, and I have our scrubber. This is this little green bar. Our little scrubber bar here is starts at 0. This is the 0th position, or the first frame, if you will. We have something like 250 frames of animation that we have here, but we want to reduce this. Let's on the bottom, you can see that there's a start frame and an end frame. I can change this end frame to something like 60. Okay. I can also zoom in by scrolling in. I can pan the animation in by right-clicking and dragging. So if I zoom in, I can see that I have more detail on the frames. I can go right down to 2s, right? So 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. And as you can see, right, in the animation, I'm just going to make sure that you guys can see everything here. I'm sorry about the screen again. I have to be cognizant. I have to be wary of this because I'm going to see something and then I'm going to think you can see it and you can't, and that's a bad thing. So that's something that, sorry, my projector in this room is a little bit weirder than the other room. How's that? That's probably better. All right, so yeah, so you have your timeline. So right now we've broken this down into 60 frames. And what I want to do is I want to capture the initial frame. So here's my initial frame, frame 1. By the way, you can also do it here manually on the bottom. On the bottom, you can actually choose frame 5 or something like that, and it'll move the scrubber wherever you want it. Yes? That's how it works. It's the first frame of animation. It doesn't start from 0 usually. It usually starts from the first frame. I know it doesn't do zero-based counting. How about that? Right, in this case. Sorry?
It shouldn't matter when you import it.
It doesn't matter. It won't matter for you, right? All right, so if we start at frame 1, I want to capture the initial position. This is the rest position, let's say, of our cube. So if I capture it, I can do that with the I key, I. And notice there's different options. One is I only want to capture location, or I only want to capture rotation, or I only want to do scale, or I can capture location and rotation, or location, rotation, and scale. Let's do this one, location, rotation, and scale. So when I do that, if I move my scrubber away, you can see that there is a yellow mark next to this, indicating that there's a keyframe, a yellow mark, right? And also, if I press N, the N key, you can see that this is now been highlighted in yellow, indicating that we have captured a keyframe at this position, keyframe as position 1. Yes.
What was the shortcut?
I. If you put your mouse in the middle of the screen here, and you just want to capture, press the I, and then choose location, rotation, and scale in the menu. Are you with me? Wait, one step at a time. Next, I want to move my I don't want to move my object. I want to move my scrubber to the next keyframe. Let's go into keyframe 10 in this case, right? So keyframe 10, notice that this is all green now because it doesn't have a keyframe, and I want to move this object around. Let's say move it up in this case. And I'm going to scroll out here so we can see a little bit better. So I'm going to move this object up, and I want to capture the position of this object. So then I can press I, as an example, location, rotation, and scale again, and capture a second keyframe at keyframe 10. And now if I scrub between keyframe 1 and keyframe 10, I get this. I get this, right? So that's what happens. It moves. All the middle frames, which I didn't keyframe, are automatically calculated and by our program, Blender, right? So it goes from 1 to 10. All right, we can keep doing this a little bit. So let's make it so that it goes to the left. First, I'm going to move my scrubber over to keyframe 20, let's say, and then I move this thing to the left. And then let's make it so that it's also, I'm going to also scale this down. So scale it right down. So now there's two things that are happening. I'm moving it and I'm scaling it. Yes, Jordan. How do I do what? I. Click the, press the I button again, and then press the new position. You have to actually move the scrubber first and then do it. I'll do this again in a second. So I press I, and then location, rotation, and scale. So now I have 3 keyframes. The first one, which is here, my second one, which is here, and my third one, which moves me over there. All right?
It's very similar to the recording of animation that we have on Unity, right?
Correct. It's the same, almost like a timeline in Unity, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or the animator in Unity, right? So you can see I can do this over and over again, right? And again, let's move our scrubber to keyframe number 30. And then what we'll do is we'll move our object kind of over there, way over there in the background. We'll make it bigger as well. And we'll also rotate it, some kind of amount, right? There we go. And then we'll capture that with an I, location, rotation, and scale. Fantastic. We'll move our keyframe to number 40, right? We'll move it across. we will deform, scale our object across only one axis, the z-axis, and we'll also scale it across the x-axis to make it thinner. There we go. And we'll also rotate it across the y-axis. There we go, to make it move like this. So all kinds of transformations. There we go. And now we'll capture that. Cool. So now we have this. Very cool. And let's say for the last one, we want to move this maybe down below the scene, and we want to rotate it back, right, and scale it across the x-axis, scale across the x-axis a little bit more, scale across the y-axis much fatter. There we go. And then rotate it across the x-axis and rotate it across the y-axis, all kinds of crazy rotations and scalings. And you would do this because to demonstrate everything, and then we will location, rotation, and scale. So some crazy movements here. And then again, we have in our scrubber, boom, 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 all the way over here. It comes down. And then I want to send it back to the origin. So when I go back to this, and I just want to recenter everything. So let's put these all to zeros. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. These are all the scales. 1, 1, 1. There. Okay, and then I want to capture that.
What's the shortcut to see the metrics and
the N key shows us the numeric key the properties on the right. All right, so we have this little animation, and it's like a few keyframes, not that many. And let's see how it loops. You can press the play button on the bottom to make it loop. So it'll keep going over and over again, and you can see that it's very uniform. Kind of moves over. And what it also does to note is it eases in and eases out of each position. If you don't want this, you can modify this, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so are we good? Are we all on the same page here? Anyone not understand or can't do it, put up their hand. All right, so this is how animation works, very basic with keyframes. And this is actually locomotion. There's no animation right now. The motion is what's happening here, and I'm just rescaling it and moving it around. That's all I'm doing, locomotion. All right, cool. Very boring, but cool. All right, let's bring this little animation into Unity, just the way it is. So I'm going to say that I'm going to go to File. I'm going to export. Actually, let's just save it as the whole thing. So File, Save. I'm going to save this as Cube 2 animation. There we go. And save it. And then I want to make a new Unity project. Here we go. Let's make a new Unity project with us together. I'm going to call this and I'll put this up on Slack for you guys later on. GAME2015 W2019, and it's lesson 10. That's the thing I'm making, lesson 10. Let's say B, because you guys are the B team. Create. And what I want to do is I want to bring the animation that I just made into Unity from Blender, right? So what is this useful for? Simple animations like this are useful for things like door openings. If I want to do things like blocks falling in a certain pattern. I want to have my maze shifting around if I made a maze. Or if I want to have a basic camera rotation, if I want to rotate the camera in the scene, those kind of things. I can do all those basic things, and I can plot them all in Blender. I can make a whole level in Blender and bring them into Unity, and we're good to go. Just to prepare ourselves with Unity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a couple of folders. One of them is going to be the scripts folder, because we're going to have a little bit of scripts in this one, but not much. And we're going to just make the scenes folder with an underscore in front. And I'm also going to add in a models folder to keep organized. I like being organized when I do stuff in Unity and in Blender and Unreal. I think it's important to keep organized. I'm also going to do so models, textures, and maybe some materials. So materials. There we go. As before, all the same stuff that we've had before. And one more will be prefabs. If I'm going to have any more prefabs, let's just add that into prefabs. So we've got basic stuff in here, right? And what I want to do now is I want to import our stuff, our model, into the models folder. I'm just going to use the import feature, so assets, import new assets. I'm going to pick the asset from the desktop, and it's going to be OneDrive desktop. Where did I put it? Greek pillar. Okay, that is, oh, there it is. Okay, so I want to pick my model. I made cube 2 animation. I want to import that whole model. Sorry about that.
Did you save the Blender file?
Yeah, only a Blender file, so I didn't use it as an FBX. All right, so there's my cube animation model, and I want to modify a couple things. So in my model, on the right-hand side, when I bring a Blender model in, or even an FBX, on the right-hand side, I have this thing called model. Let's click there. I want to add colliders or generate colliders. That's definitely what I want. And UVs, I want to get those in and click apply. I also want to go to my materials for now. And where it says use embedded materials, I want to change that to extract materials. Let's do that. Let's extract materials. And I want to extract it inside of the materials folder. So materials folder is going to get a material. There we go. And if I look in there now, you can see that there's a material called material, which I'm going to call to, like, I don't know, like light green. I'll change the name, light green. And I'll even change the diffuse property of the material to make it like a little lighter green. There we go. Excellent. And I want to pull my model from the models folder into my scene. There we go. Here's my scene. And you can see that I'm not really seeing a lot of. Let's just make sure that I can see this thing a little better. I'm just moving my camera so I can see it from a perspective view a little bit, and maybe even from the left. I'll rotate my camera just a little bit more. There we go. So you can see my model here. Okay, this is my camera. And you see that's what my camera is looking at right now. And if I press play, nothing happens, right? Because even though I brought my model and had animations with it, all I have is an ugly cube. Yay. How do I correct this? Well, I can add another folder. I'll make another folder called animations. In my animations folder, I want to create a animator. So animations, right click. I want to create a new, under animation, there's something called animator controller. Let's put that together. I'm sure you guys have done this. I'll review for some of you. Please bear with me. I'm assuming you guys don't know anything, all right? Not because of that you don't know anything. So we'll call this the cube controller now, and we'll double click onto it, which will show us that there's nothing in the controller. Okay, so this is basically a map of our state machine for the animations, right? So if I look at my models, you can see that my model, if I open it up, has this default take, is what it's called. And this default take, if I drag and drop, first of all, if I click onto it, it looks like it's locked and loop time is off. But if I click on the Cube 2 animation itself, and if I go to animation, I can make sure that I click on loop time. If I click on loop time, it'll loop continuously if I bring this in. So then I can take this default take and I can drag and drop it into my animator. And you can see that my default take is my default animation. Now, it's not going to do anything yet because I have to take this animator. So if I go back to the Cube 2 animation object, let's just call this object the player for now. That's in the hierarchy. And if I drag and drop from the animations folder, the cube controller into the controller part of the animator that's built into this object, then if I press play, you're going to get the following. Yay, it's the exact same thing we've seen before. And to see this inside of the scene, it looks like this. So you actually get the exact same motion that you would otherwise. Questions around this? Does anyone not know what I did or have questions around how I did it? Literally, all I did was I went through Blender. I added some keyframes. I exported it. I imported it into Unity. Just a recap. in Unity, I had to make a couple of changes. And the key one was I had to create an animation controller that I attached to the new object. That's what I did. But I dragged and dropped the built-in take, the default take that's part of this object, and I dragged it into the animation controller, and then we're able to make things move. Okay. Now this is locomotion. It is not animation. However, if I was to move my object here, not just using this, but if I moved it with some kind of controller or whatever, I could influence what's happening here in terms of my motion. Okay, so pretty simple stuff. All right, but really boring. Nothing too crazy or sinister here, right? So, but the idea is that we're talking about basic keyframing. So keyframe-based animation that we're bringing in, okay? But one person asked me earlier today, hey, what about if I want to move these keyframes around? How do I do that? And you just asked about, you know, moving things in the on the animation view. There's another view called the animation view. If you click on the top in Blender, take a look. There's an other layout. You can go to the animation layout here in Blender, animation layout. And in the animation layout, you have this dope sheet up here, as well as the curves down here, right? And you still have the timeline, and you still have your object over here, and a little bit of a camera perspective over here to see what it looks like. So kind of an interesting layout. But one of the ones we want is if I scroll in on this part up here, I can zoom in on the keyframes up here. So this is the keyframe part. And if I want to, I can use most of the things that I can do in regular shapes with my keyframes. For example, if I press A for deselect all, I can deselect my keyframes here. And then I can use B, the box select mode, to select the keyframe that I want to modify. So I want to modify this keyframe. And then if I press G, I can move my keyframe closer or farther away. So I can modify the way my keyframes have made. If I'm not happy where they are, I can move them away, and then it modifies the animation. So now my scrubber, if you notice, as I come to this keyframe, then I come quickly to that, much faster to this keyframe than I had before, because they're closer together. So there's less interpolation and more movement, so it's going to seem like a quicker motion. So boom, right? So it's just going to jump there like this now. And then there's going to be a really slow motion from here all the way to here. So it's going to seem a lot slower now because there's the distance is greater, right? So you can do that here. The other thing sometimes we want to do is notice that on the bottom here, it's all linear, right? So, well, actually, it's a Bezier curve, if you will, right? Bezier curve. So if you look, if I kind of scroll in there, if I press the T key when my mouse is hovering in here, then I have options to how I want this movement to go. So notice that the interpolation right now is this Bezier curve, if you will, right? Everyone pronounces it different. I like Bezier, but people say that's wrong. There's also linear, which is a straight line, so there's no ease in and ease out, right? And there's also constant. Constant is like there wouldn't be any interpolation at all. It's like literally you see one keyframe and then see the other one. And there's like, it goes from one state to the other, which is great for things like a sharp cut of a camera. So if I have a camera that's looking at you and then I want to cut to this other camera, I want to use constant, right? Which is different than, maybe I don't want to do this. I don't want to pan over. I just want to cut from one scene to the other. Yes?
What's the shortcut you use?
T. T. If you actually go down into that area. So the only way you can get this is if you go down, hover into this area down here, which is the curves. And if I press the T key, you can see that I have this other option for interpolation, right? I can also choose the type of easing if I want to. I can choose quadratic easing or cubic or whatever if I want to have a different easing. And also different kinds of effects, elastic bounces and stuff like that. Again, you can experiment with some of these, but this is kind of an interesting way of how the program does the interpolation that it does. So remember that Blender is going to do all the interpolation for me, but I can control the type here. And there's also programs you can use, and you can write your own code to do that as well. Okay, questions around this. So this is how you modify stuff if you really need to. So now that I've modified this, let's say, for example, I want to take the first two. I'm going to deselect all here, and I want to take these first two keyframes, and I want to make them cut from one keyframe to the other. So right now it looks like it's pretty smooth. Look, watch. From here, it goes smoothly to this place. But I don't want that. I just want it to teleport from here to here, right? I can do that by just pressing the B key, selecting those two areas there, I select those two parts. Down here, I can press the T key, and then I can press constant. And when I do that, it changes the curve for these two interpolations. So now it does this. Boom, right? So there is no interpolation between the two. Look, right? Again, not really useful for animation, but great for camera cuts and stuff like that. So I want to go from here to here, and then do the rest smoothly. So lots of control you have with the type of interpolation. Keyframes, you can modify them. You can add more. You can scale them. If I want to scale a bunch of them, scale them out. So I can say I want to scale these three. Hold on a second, Ricardo. If I want to scale these three keyframes out, I can select those and press the S key and scale them. Look. So, which kind of makes it weird, and then I can move them as a group, right? And that changes the whole animation itself. So I can kind of move here, I want it here, and then it kind of moves out and then comes back. And you can modify these so that you get the effect that you want. Yes, what were you going to ask?
How can you select one of the curves to modify the interpolation, etc.? Yes.
One of the curves.
Yeah.
All right. So again, if you're going in here, let me just bring this out because we're not looking at the F curves at all. I can kind of select this and move it around.
You can select each of the F curves.
Yes, yes. So if you notice here, what's happening is this is the curve, right? And by the way, there's also drivers, which we don't go into right now. But if I left click, so if I left click anywhere, it's going to give me two things. My scrubber is going to move. This is my scrubber, right? Notice it moves here and here, down here too. So my scrubber moves left and right, right? And that is actually, for each of those, for each of my objects. Now the other thing is that each of these things here, notice the colors. There's blue, and this is for this object only, by the way. There's blue, there's red, and there's green. These are all the axes that I'm affecting, right? So if I notice the blue axes, right, across the Z-axis here, because that's the only thing that's moving. The rest are staying flat. So if I right-click on this thing, it doesn't do anything. But if I deselect all by pressing the A button, I can select different keyframes. So I can press B, box select, select only that part of my curve, right? And you can do that because each of these points is what you really care about and not necessarily the points in between. So I want to kind of modify this particular curve. If I right-click onto this point right here, right? Then what I can do is I can press the G key if I'm not wrong. If you press the G key, you can modify the curve. Now this is a kind of remember it's a kind of a constant curve, so that's why it looks kind of blocky. But if you press the G key on a curve that looks like this, so let's see if I can get this one. Here's a curve that's more rounded. It's a Bezier curve, right? So you can see that I have these two control points, right? Where I can modify the control points by right-clicking and dragging. So I can change my curve to have more control. So I can kind of, curve it so that it's more of a sinusoidal kind of thing, right? I can flatten it out, by making it like this. And so that changes the type of interpolation that happens in your animation. So if you're trying it out, you can see that as I go through here, there's a different kind of effect across the Z-axis than I had before. And you do this for each axis. So if you really want to go crazy, you can do that. Again, a little bit out of scope for what we're doing in this course, but if you really want ultimate control, you can do it this way. Sorry? N? Yes, sorry. I forgot about that. Yes. So yes, you can do all kinds of stuff here numerically as well, not just by eye, which thank you very much for that. All right, so questions around basic locomotion and stuff like that. Great. All right, I'm gonna stop recording the animation part because what I want to do here is I want to go into the next part, which is I want to do some simple deformation with bones. And this is going to be the animation portion, right? So I'm going to do this like video number 2, so that way you can just have locomotion separate and then the animation portion separate. Let's do that.